It was Thanksgiving weekend of 1989, and we had gone about an hour south of where we lived to visit with my parents and my wife's parents for that Thanksgiving holiday. We were headed back home, and we were just about 2 or 3 miles from our house. When, as we were heading north in our 1985 Pontiac Bonneville, there was an older retired couple headed east in a 1970-something powder blue Ford Pinto, and he missed the stop sign. So at 45 miles an hour, our 1985 Pontiac Bonneville hit the side of that little Ford Pinto right at his wife's door. And later that night, Eileen Burford died at Alliance Community Hospital in Alliance, Ohio. I hated that experience. I hated that occasion because I had to sit my 3 young daughters down and tell them that the car that they were in the back seat, the car driven by their father, was involved in this accident where somebody died. I attended Miss Burford's memorial service. Mr. and Mrs. Burford were very well-known Mennonite people. If you'd been a Mennonite in western Pennsylvania or eastern Ohio or West Virginia, you probably would have known of or heard of the Burfords. They had come to Hartville, Ohio, where we were living. They had come that night for a wedding ceremony, and they were headed back home. Her memorial service was held in that very building where they were that night attending that wedding. And the place was packed. I was sitting right in the middle of the auditorium. And whenever Mr. Burford got up to the microphone and he happened to seek me out and call me out by name and ask me to stand. And when he asked me to stand, this is what he said to everybody there. He said, "Mr. Miller, I want to thank you for helping get my wife to heaven." And I was overwhelmed. What was I supposed to do? How was I supposed to respond to that? I didn't, except for just quietly taking my seat. When our daughter was 10 years old, our youngest daughter, she went to summer youth camp, and the nurse there saw some things that she was concerned about and recommended that we take our daughter to the doctor, and we found out that she had a neurological condition. It's called hydrocephalus, and it's a relatively normal, for neurology people, a relatively normal issue to deal with. Where basically what they do is they drill a hole in your head and they put a valve in there and they run a tube from that valve down to your stomach, and your cranial pressure is monitored by that high pressure valve. So we consented to have that surgery done. And 30 days after that surgery, we went for the post-op visit, thinking things were fine, but things were not fine. Things were worse now than they were before. Whenever she was initially diagnosed, it was explained to us that she had a restriction or a constriction in a cerebral aqueduct that was pushing her brain up against her skull. So whenever they released that pressure from that surgery, and with that valve, her brain began to recede from her skull. And then there was blood beginning to collect on both sides of her brain, bilateral subdural hematomas. And she's in real danger now. So she's admitted to Rainbow Baby and Children's Hospital, a part of the University Hospitals of Cleveland in Cleveland, Ohio, a renowned, world-known children's hospital. And while she was there, she was cared for by a Dr. Mapstone. Dr. Mapstone was a pediatric neurosurgeon. I did not even know there were pediatric neurosurgeons. That's a specialty within a specialty. Dr. Mapstone was the only pediatric neurosurgeon between Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Detroit, Michigan, a highly densely populated part of our country. Dr. Mapstone was the only one. My daughter struggled mightily during that time. Her mother and her father struggled mightily during that time. During that summer, she had 5 brain surgeries because everything that could go wrong seemed to go wrong. She spent time in PICU, pediatric intensive care. And I remember nothing of what Dr. Mapstone said, except this one thing. From the entire time that we were going through that agonizing experience, he came into the pediatric intensive care unit and he said, "Neurosurgeons are often the bearers of bad news." I don't know what he said before that. I don't know what he said after that. But I do remember that. Looking back, it was as if he was preparing us for what he thought might be possible, that we would lose our 10-year-old daughter. In between those surgeries, as I said, she had 5 that summer. Between, I think it was the 3rd and 4th surgery, we left her in the pre-op room and we walked together to the family waiting room, and we were both crying our eyes out. And I remember her saying, "I never want to walk through this hallway again." And you know, within 48 hours, we were having to walk through that hallway again because everything that could go wrong went wrong. She laid there unresponsive. Didn't matter what it was in the way of physical touch, didn't matter what noise, she was totally unresponsive in a comatose-like state. My wife was sitting next to her one day, and my wife bit into a raw carrot. You know that crunch? You know that crushing crunch sound? What is that noise? That's what our 10-year-old daughter said, coming out of that comatose-like state. Those were her first words. What's that noise? Obviously, a praise the Lord moment, but the struggle wasn't over. Because coming out of that, she had to have months and months of physical and occupational therapy. She had to learn to walk again. She had to learn to feed herself again. And here was this 10-year-old child struggling mightily with something that was beyond her ability to comprehend, and at times beyond the ability of her parents to experience. If you were to see her now, you would never know that she had such problems. Praise the Lord. When my wife was in her early 50s, she started spending too much time in the shower. Guys, you probably can relate to this. I would sit on the bed and I would read while she was taking a shower, and the water ran a long time. And I just dismissed that in my ignorance as what older women must do when they get older. They just spend time in a hot shower for a long time. Little did I know, now in looking back, that was the first sign that she had Parkinson's disease. It's called bradykinesia. It's like living in a slow motion world. That's why it took her so long. Now, when you think of Parkinson's disease, you're probably like I was at that point in time. You only thought of tremors. But there's a lot more involved than that. If you do some research about it, you'll find about a dozen or so different potential symptoms of a Parkinson's patient. She had no tremors, but she had about 8 to 10 of those other conditions. She went from being a normally functioning adult to when she drew her last breath, and for actually those last couple of years, to becoming as dependent as she was the day she was born. She lost the ability to get up out of a chair, She lost the ability to bathe herself. She lost the ability to walk. She fell out of bed one time, had to be transported to the hospital and had a hip joint replacement surgery. She lost the ability to eat. She lost the ability to talk. And on Christmas morning of 2013, at 9:40 in the morning, I watched her draw her last breath with our firstborn child at her side as well. During that 8.5 years of caregiving, from diagnosis to death, there were periods of time that I just about snapped. I don't know how much experience you have in caregiving, but in caregiving, it can be highly stressful and it can be exhausting. It can challenge you and prompt you to become a person that you don't even want to become, and struggle mightily with that experience. I remember leaving her presence on numerous occasions, and I would go up to the upstairs bathroom, and I would say a 3-word prayer because that's all I could get out of my head and out of my mouth. Lord, help me. That's all I could say. Life sometimes can be so hard, beyond our imagination, so shocking sometimes, and so grueling as a long journey that we can struggle mightily and feel really overwhelmed. What are we supposed to do? To feel overwhelmed is to feel as if you're being submerged in your negative circumstances. Or another way you might look at it is feeling crushed by the heavy burden that you're bearing. The people of God do not get a get-out-of-trial-free card when we choose God. We live in a broken, fallen world, and bad things happen to really good people, just like bad things happen to bad people. And the things that we experience have a real impact on us that we need to understand and appreciate, to be patient with ourselves, and to work through the storms of our life and try to navigate those very difficult times in our life. Even David, that man after God's own heart, struggled mightily in his life. Here's one of those times in Psalm 31. In Psalm 31, it is obvious that he is at his wit's end. He's about ready to snap too. Pick up there at verse 9 and notice how he describes metaphorically what he's going through. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I am in trouble. My eye wastes away with grief. Yes, my soul and my body, for my life is spent with grief, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. I am a reproach among my enemies, but especially among my neighbors, and I am repulsive to my acquaintances, and those who see me outside flee from me. I am forgotten like a dead man out of mind. I am like a broken vessel. For I hear the slander of many. Fear is on every side. While they take counsel together against me, they scheme to take away my life. Now, I have no idea what exactly he was going through at this time, what particular afflictions that he was experiencing at this time. All I know is that the impact of what he was experiencing was causing him to feel overwhelmed. He was struggling mightily. Can some of you relate to this? I think I see enough age in this room to believe that there are people here in this room who have really struggled in their life beyond anything they ever imagined when they were younger. And all you have to do to experience tragedies, heartbreak, and loss in your life is just keep breathing. If you're breathing, you're at risk. The trials of life are inevitable, and losses of numerous kinds are inevitable. And it can be overwhelming. You probably would imagine that I have become partial to the widowed. And I have. Here's what one of them wrote. If you want to know about overwhelming, I'll show you overwhelming. Oh, the loss of a mate's not the only way you can be overwhelmed, but it's a big one. She writes, if I could have one positive thing come from Dale's death, it would be the ability to explain in words the utter overwhelming sadness of the loss. One of the primary differences between the death of your spouse and the loss of anyone else is that you have a level of physical intimacy with your spouse that you just don't have with other people. That, combined with the sheer amount of time that you spend together, heightens the loss. Until you live it, I'm not sure you can totally wrap your thoughts around the crushing magnitude of losing a beloved spouse. Even as a strong woman with a powerful faith walk, a wonderful family, and a large support group, I was brought to my knees by Dale's death. I've totally changed how I think about life, marriage, and myself. Whatever happens in my future, I will never be the same. H. Norman Wright, who himself, as a faith-based counselor, lost his wife and has now passed on, wrote this: the loss of our spouses changes our entire lives. It shifts the foundation of our existence. Nothing is as it was. Even the familiar becomes unfamiliar. Every aspect of our lives is disrupted without our partners. Everything has to be relearned. In a culture that doesn't like to acknowledge loss or talk about the impact, grieving is difficult. And when we add this silence to the fact that most of us have never been taught about the processes and the normalcy of grief, no wonder we struggle. Prior to the death of your spouse, your life was going in a well-established direction. You had an identity. You could say who you were. This has changed. You're not exactly who you were. The person that you lost was a part of your identity. You were someone's spouse, someone's partner. You continue to be that partner in your heart and be that person in your heart and memory. But there's a vacant place where your loved one stood. I never thought about this until a few years after my wife passed away. There's only one way a good marriage ends. Only one. There are many ways bad marriages end. Some of you, I'll bet, know that by experience. There's only one way a good marriage ends. And that's for somebody to die. And that leaves somebody behind. I challenge every single married person in this room. Cherish what you have while you have it. Because you won't have it forever. Marriage is not eternal. It's temporary, just like our life here in this world is. And I just suggest this particular thought too. Don't neglect the subject of widowhood until you become one. How in the world does a person survive, learn to cope, and grow through the experience? It can be done. I don't know if you saw it, but that weirdly placed banner out there that's crooked in the foyer says, "I can and I will." It's one of the mottos of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. The other two are on the two side walls in this room. I can and I will survive. I can and I will learn to cope. I can and I will grow through this experience. By the grace of God, you have the ability, because of your relationship with God, to cope with and learn from and grow from and be blessed by every tragedy you experience in your life. How did David cope? with his overwhelming experience. One thing he did was he made it a point of keep on trusting the Lord. In the first couple of verses of Psalm 31, read in your hearing, the psalm begins by saying, "In you, O Lord, I put my trust," or "I take my refuge." Now, if you were seeking refuge because you heard that there was a tornado warning, would you go to the nearest mobile home park and take refuge? I doubt it. You'd go to a refuge where you could be safe from the threat that's extreme. We need to take refuge in God. And that's so especially true when we're threatened by the storms of life. David then mentions in verse 6, "I've hated those who regard useless idols, but I trust in the Lord." And then he brings this subject up again in verse 14. "But as for me, I trust in you, O Lord. I say you are my God. My times are in your hand." You know, we most frequently relate this to Jesus hanging on the cross. But notice verse 5. It was David who wrote this first. "Into your hand I commit my spirit." That's trust. That's what trust is. It's when we accept the fact that we don't know everything and that we can't figure everything out and we need help. You know, there is not just a male pride, there's a human pride. And I hear it and am grated internally every time I hear somebody say, "I got this." Now, my youngest daughter, that I told you had all those health problems when she was 10 years old, she on occasion tells me, "Dad, I've got this." And she says it just to aggravate me because she knows it aggravates me. I have a much better philosophy that I want to share with you that reflects, I think, the spirit that we should have. God's got this, and I've got God, and this is going to be okay. I don't know when, I don't know how, but God's got this, I've got God, and it's going to be okay. It may not be until the day you draw that last breath, but it's going to be okay eventually when we take our refuge in God, when we trust Him. Whenever you take your children and you deliver them to child care, that's a trust, an entrustment. Whenever you take money to the bank, you give it to perfect strangers. That's an entrustment. What we are challenged to do by God is take our lives and entrust them to Him. As a matter of fact, another indication of what trust is all about, I think, is at the end of verse 3. When David says, "Lead me and guide me." That's trust. Knowing that we need led and we need guided, that we don't know everything. But could we be honest enough to admit that there are times that we might have a hard time trusting God? Would we be willing to admit that? In Bible class, we talked about how that sometimes because of our life circumstances, we might be so challenged as to not be so inclined to praise the Lord because of our humanness. Well, it's not always easy to trust God either. Lauren Daigle, a young faith-based singer, sings this song with these lyrics. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. Amen. That is the spirit of a person wholly devoted to God. We need to realize that we need to trust God. Live consistent with His will. Keep devoted to Him, no matter how we feel within us. No matter what confusion that we might have. Old brother Charles Hodge, one of my favorites of the past, I remember him writing these words. Faith does not give us all the answers. Faith gives us the ability to live without the answers. Trust, no matter what. You know, sometimes when we're going through difficult times in our life, we think that all we have is burdens. Poor Job. We mentioned yesterday in the workshop, Job, that great man of God. We put him on such a high pedestal, but we must remember he is human. And so when he says that his life was full of trouble in chapter 14, verse 1, and when he said he had no hope in chapter 7, verse 6, he was dead wrong. That was not true. He had God. When you have God, you're more blessed than your burden, no matter how many burdens you have. And he said his life was full of trouble. He had so many blessings. He had 3 friends that dropped everything and came to him. Now, granted, after they ministered to him by presence, they made some really bad choices about what to say. But they, like good friends, dropped everything in their life and they came to him. And they came to him not to hurt him, but to help him, to mourn and to comfort him. Chapter 2, verse 11. He was still alive. His heart was still beating. The blood was still coursing through his veins. He still had a wife. I know what most of you who weren't here yesterday are going to say, but she wasn't much of a wife. She said, curse God and die. Yeah, she snapped. She snapped. And God let her snap. And we read of no retribution she experiences because she said that. God knew what was going on inside of her. Everything Job lost, she lost. And she was watching him, somebody she loved, she was watching him, struggling mightily. She was overwhelmed and she snapped. And Job snapped a few times too in chapters 3 through 41. It's hard. Sometimes we can be so blinded by our burdens we don't realize how blessed we are. David didn't let that happen. Take a look at verse 19. Oh, how great is your goodness. Now, wait a minute. This is the guy who said, my bones waste away. I am like a broken vessel. And now he says, oh, how great is your goodness, which you've laid up for those who fear you, which you have prepared for those who trust in you in the presence of the sons of men. You shall hide them in the secret place of your presence from the plots of man. You shall keep them secretly in a pavilion from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has shown me his marvelous kindness and a strong city. He did not permit his burdens to blind him to his blessings, even though he was a mess. Have you noticed in reading the Bible that when a quality of deity, a characteristic of deity is mentioned, that oftentimes inspiration will magnify that word by a modifier? Oh, how great is your goodness. Marvelous kindness. God is that way all of the time. Nahum 1, verse 7. I think kind of oddly, it seems to me, written in a book about judgment, destruction. Nahum 1 verse 7. The Lord is good and a stronghold in day of trouble, and He knows those who take refuge in Him. God knows what's going on in your life. He not only knows that, He knows what's going on inside of you. He knows about how your feeler is behaving and how your thinker is conducting itself. And He knows about the impact that's having in your life. He knows that. What a perfect place to seek refuge, to trust, because He's good. He's kind. He wants what's best for us. Remember the goodness of God when you seem like in your life you're drowning in the badness of your circumstances. He's always good. It's really hard for us to wait. When I go to Walmart, I play a game that, number one, involves never going through Scan and Go. I hate it with a passion. I will only go through there when they give me a W-2 form at the end of the year for doing for them what they should be doing for me, because I paid a price for what I bought. I like dealing with people anyway. But I play this game where I approach the couple of cashiers, and that's usually about all there are, and I look and see which line is going to move me through the fastest. Now, I never win this game. It's very humbling, but we don't like to wait, do we? We don't like to be stuck in a car on the interstate, in a doctor's office. You know where you are sometimes in your life? You're in God's waiting room. Look at the last two verses of this psalm. Oh, love the Lord, all of His saints. For the Lord preserves the faithful and fully repays the proud person. Be of good courage. He will strengthen your heart, all you who hope in the Lord. Some translations say, wait on the Lord. That phrase makes for a very interesting study. You could do a whole study about the over 20 times that phrase is found in the Bible. Hope in the Lord or wait on the Lord. It's a very important construct for your life as a child of God. You know, one way you can know it's hard to do is we keep reminding ourselves about that on occasion when we sing. You know the song? Teach me, Lord, to wait. Beautiful song. We need to sing it more frequently because it's hard to do. You think it's hard to sit in a hospital room? You think it's hard to sit on the interstate for 3 hours on I-40 in West Tennessee in dead stop traffic? You ain't seen nothing until you live a life circumstance where you're in God's waiting room and you have no idea how long before you get out. Rosemary McKnight wrote a book about that very subject called Those Who Wait. I highly recommend it. It's a study of this phrase, hope in the Lord or wait on the Lord. She does a masterful job. One of the things that she points out in that book is, what about a cocoon? Would you break it open before it's time? Or what about the eggs in an incubator? Would you break them open before their time? And what would happen if you did? Sometimes in our life, we're just in a set of circumstances where we need to remind ourselves that we just need to be patient and wait on the Lord. You know, when you go to the restaurant and you have that male or female come to you and they're called a waiter or a waitress, if we're allowed to use that terminology now, what do? They serve. Waiting on the Lord means we keep serving the Lord. We just keep serving the Lord, no matter what. That can be a hard thing to do, though, because we don't understand and we're so impatient. I call it the Hobby Lobby verse in the Bible. The last verse in Isaiah chapter 40. You know, some home interior stores will have items for your house with this verse inscribed on them. Isaiah 40:31. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. What a sweet bite of encouragement. But we really don't understand and appreciate that passage until we see its context. In the context of this chapter, especially toward the end of the chapter, there are some rhetorical questions that are mentioned. And one of the points that's being driven home before you get to the last verse is the greatness, the awesomeness, the majesty, and the glory of God. Watch, for instance, verse 21. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is He who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. He brings the princes to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth useless. Our God is an awesome God, greater than anybody or anything in this temporary world. And then verse 27. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my just claim is passed over by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? Did you notice that? Did you notice the similarity between verse 28 and verse 21? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the weak. To those who have no might, He increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall utterly fall. But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. Young people, children, can drive mama and sometimes daddy up a wall because they have what seems like endless energy. But even the best of them will run out of gas eventually. They'll probably end up on the floor sleeping, or maybe in a chair sleeping, but they'll run out of gas. Even the youths are going to run out of gas. God doesn't run out of gas. God has power. He has awesome power. He has wisdom that is unsearchable. If there's anybody that we need to trust in and wait on and really focus on His goodness and His glory and His majesty and His kindness, it's God. And when we are struggling, we need Him desperately. It is a bad thing, we typically think, when we experience bad things. But if in the experience of a bad time in your life, I'm talking about not just a bad time. I'm talking about a heart-wrenching, horrific time in your life that could be real, in-your-face, sudden, or could just be long-term and it seems like forever. If you experience that and you become, as a result of that, a better, stronger, more faithful child of God, has that been a good thing or a bad thing for you to suffer? I'm not so crazy as to suggest any of us ought to pray for more suffering so we'd get better. But I will suggest that we might need to reframe our thinking when we're struggling most, thinking that we're at our wits' end and wanting to quit on the Lord. There are times in our life when we just feel like we're drowning and there's no hope. Even Job felt that way. Job 7, verse 6. He said he had no hope. He had the God of hope, Romans 15:13, in his life, but yet he felt like he had no hope, but he did. We have hope too. There's never a time in our life as His children that we don't have hope. We may feel as if there are hopeless circumstances, but we always have hope when we have God. In a group this large, there is no doubt in my mind but that there are people who are struggling mightily with a phase in their life that either is the result of a choice or something that they're forced to deal with because of life circumstances. And if you're struggling, we're going to sing a song of invitation, and we're going to welcome you to come and share that struggle with others. There is not a single person sitting in this room who isn't carrying baggage. You can't see it. Some of the baggage being carried by people sitting in these pews has been carried for decades. Some of that baggage is really heavy. Some of it has been recently acquired. And it's okay to let people know you're not okay. We would be a lot better off if we were a lot more transparent about how needy we are. How in the world could I possibly be of help to you if I don't even know that you're struggling, much less know what you're going through? Feel free to share that this morning, and let this good church family pray with you, pray for you, and work with you, encourage you, and help you, and support you, because now they know that you need their help. If you need to become a child of God because you're lost, we'd love to help you. We'd love to hear that confession of faith. And no doubt there are people here who will help you be baptized into Christ. If you'd like to, you come while we stand and while we sing.